everyone, and welcome to today's episode. We're going to be talking about A Heart to Treasure by DIENECE Darling. So, this one is a Georgian romance. It's set in the 1790s, and so it's a historical romance, and it also fits within the Christian fiction category. And it's a book that's related to Denise's Searching Heart series as well. So, this one's a novella, there's another book that's a novelette. So, why did I want to read this one? Well, I really enjoyed reading Hearts Unknown, which is the first book in Denise's series. And so, when I heard this one was on pre order, off I went to pre order it. I also have a book recommendation for Hearts Unknown on my blog at my website, and that's at narelleatkins.com. And there'll be a link in the show notes. So, let's talk about the book. A Heart to Treasure by DIENECE Darling is set in Georgian England in 1794. So this one has quite a few romance tropes. It's a second chances romance, and you'll soon find out how that works in a minute because a lot of the book relates to relationship problems. It also has social class differences where our main characters are from different social classes, which creates problems. And it's a reverse rags to riches story as well. So we have a poor vicar's son who has blue blood running in his veins, and we have a wealthy merchant's daughter who has money but doesn't have the titles and the family connections of the landed gentry. And the story also is about healing broken relationships, as I mentioned before. And our main characters actually spend quite a bit of time apart. So it's kind of like the being apart trope that you'll often see in historical romances because society and the rules of society will dictate the physical proximity and the physical interactions between people. And that comes into play in this story as well. And we have a whole lot of family drama too. So the first line in the story is this one, and it's a good one. Obadiah, will you still go fishing with me after you marry my sister? So, this straight away introduces us to the hero Obadiah. Now, he's the son of a vicar and he's lost his mother, so it's only his father and him. And in 2 weeks' time, he's marrying the love of his life. So, he's in the fortunate position of being able to marry someone for love who is below his station, which is unusual, particularly when you're living in a parish, because his father's the vicar, but he's not a wealthy vicar. This parish is struggling, and so they are basically scrimping and saving and living on quite a low income. And what's going to happen is that he'll become the curate, and Obadiah will basically live in a cottage and be the curate underneath his father, who's the rector of the parish. So at the start of the story, we meet Obadiah because he's out fishing with Eliza's brother. And that I'll introduce you to Eliza in a minute, but before we get there, we'll talk a bit about Obadiah. So his history is important. He went to Oxford to university, which was quite a normal thing to do if your destiny was to work in the church and become a curate or a rector or have some kind of position under the Archbishop of Canterbury. So something went wrong at university, which I'm not going to say because that's a spoiler for the story. But what happens is his father ends up saving him and he reminds Obadiah multiple times of how he had to save him from being ruined. And he's offering the curate role as part of his parish and the cottage to live in as well. And as I said, he's the vicar, his father, and they are not wealthy at all. And that's a problem in the story as well for a whole bunch of reasons. And so he's marrying Eliza, but Obadiah is marrying for love, and he knows that that's not normal. And usually, being poor, he'd have to marry someone above his station to get money. And so, in this circumstance, he looks at Eliza and realizes that he needs to turn her into a lady to be acceptable as a curate's wife. So, that's the starting point with him. Now we meet Eliza. Now she's a draper's daughter, and so she is basically working in a shop as a shopkeeper. And her father is a wealthy merchant who owns the draping shop. And this is definitely beneath the station of a lady and a curate's wife as well, which is a problem. And it's just not proper for the curate's wife to be working on the shop floor as a shop assistant. And she's marrying above her station and she's gaining social status. But as the story unfolds, you'll realize that social status doesn't actually mean a lot to her as well. She's quite a strong and independent person. And she gets very frustrated by the limitations on women within the society that they're living in at the time. So their meet cute is a flashback to their first meeting between Eliza and Obadiah. And it was awkward, it was embarrassing, it was adorable, and there was a very troublesome cat, this feline that caused a lot of mayhem as well, and is quite an important part of the story, this cat. So if you're a cat lover, you'll like this one as well. Now, this particular story, even though it's a novella, so it's a shorter story, there are a lot of problems and a whole lot of stuff happens and disasters happen. And then it blows up their relationship. And we're 2 weeks out from their wedding and everything is falling apart. And I'm not saying any more because it will give away the story. But other than to say that it's action packed, so we have a wedding in jeopardy for pretty much the majority of the story. We've got this wedding in jeopardy. And we also have the main characters apart for most of the story as well. So if you're not a big fan of romance, then you'd probably really like this one because the romance is very low key because they're not together for the large part of the story. So don't walk away from this one thinking it's a romance and I really don't do romance. It's not my thing. I would recommend you give this one a try because it could almost be categorized as historical fiction with romantic elements, other than the fact that the romance plot simmers along underneath. And I would definitely say it's romance rather than just historical fiction in terms of how the story's structured. And we have action and we have danger and we have mysteries to solve. And there's a whole lot of stuff that happens that will keep you turning the page. Now, I describe this one as having very strong faith elements because the faith and the spiritual threads are a really big and important part of the story, but at the same time, they're not preachy. So if you like to have a story that's really good in terms of solid faith content and characters wrestling with really big issues, but you often find sometimes that can move into preachy territory, then you'll like this one because it doesn't have the preachiness that can often go with that. So we've got our characters dealing with overcoming pride, which seems to be a common theme that sort of goes back to those Georgian and Regency times because of the way society is structured with all the social classes. Pride becomes quite a big issue. We have redemption and forgiveness themes, and we also look at the role of the church in terms of the rector and the curate are positions that are bestowed by society as opposed to the individuals that become the rector or the curate necessarily having a desire to serve God and to pastor a flock. So it's a very different way of looking at things, very different to the modern world in many respects, where people chase those roles because of the status that comes with it, or they're born into it. So often the second son would become the rector of the parish, where the first son is the earl or the duke or whatever, or the viscount, more likely than a duke. But anyway, we don't have any earls or dukes or viscounts in this story. It's very much ordinary people. And the historical context is really interesting. We have the French Revolution going on. And of course, if you know your history, there's a lot of history between England and France. And this story looks at how what's happening in the French Revolution is impacting life in England and also what's going on with the movement with the Methodists as well, which was a really interesting part of the story. And so I just love this story. I thought it was fabulous. And I read it quickly. I was turning the page. It was just a really easy read. It was very well written, very entertaining, and it also made me think. So, all those things that you want in a story. And what did I love about it? Well, the history, as I said, life in the 1790s in England. We're about 20 years before the Regency era, but there's still a lot of Regency things that you'll see in the story in terms of how society operated and what life was like. And as I said, the French Revolution is really impacting a lot of things in England that I wasn't aware of. So I appreciated learning about that. And society back then, it was very much geared about marrying for money, status, titles rather than marrying for love. And the story really explores how difficult it actually was for people to marry for love if they were from different social stations. And also women having such limited opportunities as well in the way that society was structured. And I loved how the main characters, in their own way, were strong and independent and wanted to follow their own paths and make their way despite a whole lot of obstacles that happened. And they're not perfect and they make mistakes and they had lessons to learn as well. But I was just really cheering them on. I wanted to see them get to their wedding and get married and actually do life together because in so many ways they were such a good match and such a good pairing, but there was all this stuff that was in the way, which you learn about when you read the story. And the side characters. So some of them are the characters you love to hate, and some of them are adorable, like our 7 year old who was talking at the beginning of the story. That's Eliza's brother. And I really appreciated how fleshed out the side characters were. And they were, as I said, they were very important to what was going on. And I really liked their interactions in the story. And there was also a lot of intrigue. So I wasn't quite sure where the story was going. And I really like it when I read a romance and I don't quite know where we're going and what's going to happen. And there was danger, there was a lot of stuff going on, and there were mysteries and things that didn't make sense that the characters had to work out as well. And I also loved how the story wasn't afraid to address corruption and the abuse of power. And that was in a few different ways. It wasn't just in one particular area of life, it was a couple of things. And how there were some big secrets being kept. And when they were revealed, that changed everything. And I appreciated how the secrets were unpacked in the story. And it also put a spotlight on some of those malignant personalities who can be around and can really skate beneath the surface and have their lovely masks on, and you don't necessarily notice they're there, but they cause all sorts of trouble and chaos and stuff behind the scenes. And so we come across some malignant personalities in this story as well, which creates a lot of problems. And my favorite book quote in the story is this one. And it wasn't easy to pick. There were probably three or four quotes I could have gone with. A couple of them were two sentences, but I chose this one because it really got to the essence of the story and it really summed up the underlying themes that were in the story. And this is the quote. Whatever you do in life, make sure you are a gentleman of the heart. And as you've probably guessed, it's our hero Obadiah who's thinking about these wise words that were given to him by a family member who loved him and wanted him to live his best life. And it was a point in the story where there was a lot of characters thinking about outward appearances versus what's going on in the heart. And when there's a disconnect, that there's a major, major problem when someone looks like a gentleman on the outside, but the way they behave is completely ungentlemanly and causing a lot of trouble. So, in terms of the impact on me, there were lots and lots of smiles in this story. It was a fun story. There was a lot happening. It was a fast read, being a novella, and it was a page turner because there was action and all sorts of things happening. And I loved learning about history in the story as well and learning more about the French Revolution and what was going on with the Methodists. And it the story really, really made me think. And sometimes novellas, you don't think of them having that depth. But Denise, in this particular story, has managed in quite a short number of words to really pack a punch in terms of the message that underlies what's happening in the story. And I really thought about how power can be abused in many different ways and in different parts of society as well, and about people hiding behind their title or their career or their status or their birthright, and how they could put on the masks that usually people would trust someone because they have this occupation or this title, but that's not necessarily the truth. And And I mean that's something we think back is an old sort of an old-fashioned thing of people had titles because they inherited it because they didn't deserve it. But I do think in our modern world there are people who seek power and get themselves into positions where we're supposed to trust them, but really they're incredibly untrustworthy people and they have the power to hurt a lot of people. So I really thought about those kind of things as well when I read this story. So it was quite relatable for today, as well as being relevant for what was happening in the historical context. So, in summary, I recommend this story to readers who like Georgian and Regency era stories, and especially if you like the romance novellas that have the low key romance and it's not as front and center as you would expect, for example, in a contemporary romance novella, where you find the characters have forced proximity and tend to be together all the time through the romance. If you like stories that have second chances, and if you like the reverse rags to riches, where you've got a nice little twist on that, you'll like this one. If you like stories set in that Georgian era that are about ordinary people, we don't have any dukes in this one, then you'll like this story. If you like seeing flawed characters who need to grow and learn things in the story, and that's to reach the place of where they need to go and to actually have a complete character arc where they start in one place and by the end of the story they're a different person and the faith elements are important in how that's happened, then you'll appreciate this one. And if you like stories that have strong faith elements that aren't preachy and that will really challenge you to think about a whole lot of stuff, then you'll like this one. And if you like stories with redemption and forgiveness themes, you'll definitely love this one. Thanks for joining me today. Does A Heart to Treasure sound like a book that you'd like to read? Have you read it? What did you think? You can let me know. If you're listening on the podcast, you can send me a text via a link in the show notes. If you're watching at YouTube, you can like the episode or leave a comment at YouTube. You can also email me at my website where I have a contact form, and that's at narelleatkins.com. And please subscribe if you've enjoyed listening to this episode. And you can subscribe at your favorite podcasting app or subscribe at YouTube, and then you'll get a notification so you'll know when the next episode drops. And also, if you've enjoyed this episode, please share the link with a friend, especially a friend who likes reading Georgian or Regency era romance novellas, and a friend who you think would enjoy reading Denise's books. Thanks for tuning in and see you next time.